Today I'm out here in the forest testing the latest engine in Ford's F-150 pickup truck, their all-new 3-liter diesel. This is a 2018 F-150, but you'll notice we're also talking about the 2019 model year because the changes are very minor and they actually have nothing to do with the diesel engine that's under this hood. Ford obviously decided to take a page out of FCA's playbook because the EcoDiesel in the Ram 1500 has been very popular. And this year, everybody is hopping on the bandwagon. We have a diesel F-150, we also have the upcoming diesel Silverado, diesel GMC Sierra, and a refreshed diesel in the Ram 1500 pickup truck. The diesel engine in the F-150 reminds me, in a way, of my little baby chainsaw right here. This is the newest member of my chainsaw family. I'm kind of a chainsaw addict. I live out here in the woods. I own 6 of them for various different purposes, but you'll have to wait until the end of the video for me to say why the F-150 and this chainsaw reminded me a little bit of one another. Up front, we have Ford's latest pickup truck design language. We have LED headlamps and these large headlamp modules. The version of the F-150 that we're driving is the Platinum trim, so the front end is a little bit different than the lesser trims. We have chrome tow hooks down there up front, fog lamps right down here as well. As we see in many pickup trucks, the lower portion of the bumper is a steel component that helps improve durability out on the farm or on the ranch, whereas the upper components are plastic. Behind this large Ford logo, we find a camera because we do have the 360-degree camera system in this particular vehicle. And then we have a radar sensor up front as well because this has all the latest Ford active safety systems, including radar adaptive cruise control, pre-collision autonomous braking, lane keeping assistance, etc. General Motors and FCA recently released all new pickup trucks, but the F-150 has been around for a little while. It's available in all the body styles you see at the bottom of your screen down there. We're not talking about length because it does change quite a bit based on which body you get, which bed you get, etc. One of the big things to know, however, is that all the F-150s are basically the same generation. So all the interiors are going to be the same, whether you get the short bed or the long bed or the short body or the long body. But at the moment, that is not what we see if you're shopping for a Silverado, a Sierra, or a Ram, because those manufacturers have targeted the larger body style with the large 4 doors right here for their newest models, and they haven't released the 2-door versions of those vehicles just yet. So if you want to get a 2-door Ram 1500, you'll actually be buying the older model. If you get the 4-door Ram 1500, you'll be buying the current generation. Right back here, the model that we're driving does have one of the shorter beds, which means, of course, we can't fit 8-foot lumber back here. When it comes to overall styling, there's not too much to say about the rear end of the F-150. It looks like a pickup truck. We have parking sensors that are not as well integrated into the rear bumper as we see in SUVs because this is a steel bumper just like the front, and that means that these modules couldn't be integrated into them like you could a painted bumper. The exhaust is on the side here, not in the back, so we don't see that integrated into the rear bumper like we do see in some. And we have 2 cameras right back here integrated into the tailgate. One is looking primarily down here at the hitch, so that way when you're backing up to your trailer, it's a little easier to do that. And the other one is giving you a more traditional rear view. Ford really caused a lot of waves in the industry when they announced that this generation of the F-150 was going to get a body that was primarily made of aluminum. Aluminum is a little bit more expensive than steel, and there are certain disadvantages, but the main advantage is weight. The F-150 lost a lot of weight because of the aluminum construction, and that helps them actually increase payload and towing capacity. It also gives you nice touches like a tailgate that is really easy to open and close. It's damped there, so that way it drops down easily. It's a very easy one-handed tailgate. Now on the downside, you do have to know that aluminum is not as dent resistant or as puncture resistant as steel. So if you're worried about overall bed durability, if you do plan on bringing your front loader and just dumping a pallet of cinder blocks or bricks right there into the bed of your truck, this may not be as durable as the steel beds that are in this segment. But for the average pickup truck owner, having that reduced curb weight, the increased payload ability, and the increased towing ability is probably worth the trade-off. Ford has, without a doubt, the widest variety of engines you can get under the hood of your half-ton pickup truck, likely because they sell more half-ton pickup trucks than everybody else. And that's before we take into account the hybrid drivetrain that we expect to see sometime around the 2020 model year. Things start out with a base naturally aspirated V6 engine that produces 290 horsepower and 265 pound-feet of torque. That's the only engine mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission. Basically, that engine is for people that want the least expensive engine available. From there, we move on up into the turbo engine lineup. A 2.7-liter twin-turbo V6 is next, producing 325 horsepower and 400 pound-feet of torque. That's actually the same amount of torque that we find in the optional 5-liter V8 still under this hood. It's also worth noting that although 325 horsepower is not as many horsepower as that 5-liter V8, we actually get those horses at lower RPMs than the 5-liter V8. Next up is a 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6, and there are a few different power levels depending on which model you get and which year you get, because for 2019, we will now get the more powerful engine in the top-end trims of the F-150, and in the past, they were reserved for the Raptor. Then, of course, there is the engine we're all here to talk about, which is this new 3-liter turbo diesel. It has kind of an interesting history. This is a European diesel engine. It was initially designed for Land Rover, Range Rover, and Jaguar. But of course, Ford used to own those brands and still makes engines for them. So when they needed a diesel, they reached out, grabbed this engine out of the bin, and then thoroughly redesigned it for use in the F-150 pickup truck. So even though this is made in a factory in England, it is actually not the same engine that we see in those Land Rover models. It has been redesigned specifically for this vehicle. Power comes in at 250 horsepower and 440 pound-feet of torque. That's a little bit more power and a little bit more torque than we find in the EcoDiesel in the Ram 1500. Now, FCA has not said what the new power figures will be when the EcoDiesel comes back. And you heard that right, comes back. Because in the new Ram 1500, you won't be able to get the 3-liter diesel right away. You will have to wait a little bit longer, and we don't know exactly when that will be. Competition is also heating up from General Motors because the Chevy Silverado is also going to be getting a new diesel engine as well. If you're interested in a little bit of trivia, I find it personally interesting that this engine was originally designed for Ford's European luxury divisions, whereas the EcoDiesel under the hood of the Ram 1500 pickup trucks was actually originally designed for Cadillac. As you'd expect out of a small diesel engine, fuel economy tops the F-150 lineup for the moment. 25 miles per gallon combined if you get the rear-wheel drive version of this, 22 if you choose the 4-wheel drive model, which is what we're driving here, although we have been averaging about 23 miles per gallon without towing. As I said earlier, there are definitely some benefits to the aluminum construction in the F-150, and one of those is towing ability. Towing tops out at 13,200 pounds maximum in the F-150 depending on the trim that you get. Now, the diesel is not that trim, however. The diesel tops out at 11,400 pounds because of the trims that the diesel is available in and the overall weight of the diesel engine and the changes in the drivetrain, etc. It's also worth noting again that the diesel does not produce as much peak torque as that 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6. That's what's going to give you the 13,200 pound maximum capacity. It's also worth noting, however, that in many states, towing capacity is limited by legislation and driver's license categorization. So in California, for instance, 10,000 pounds maximum conventional is the most you can tow without a commercial or non-commercial Class A. And there are a lot of states out there that are actually quite similar. Some states' towing legislation is a little bit confusing, and it goes off of the gross combined weight rating of the truck and the trailer itself, but around 10,000 to about 15,000 pounds is pretty average in America for maximum limits without a commercial license. So be sure and keep that in mind. Now in California, of course, if you have a fifth wheel, then that limit goes up to 15,000 pounds. In terms of overall comparisons, the aluminum has helped give Ford, on average, a higher towing ability than we find in the competition. So if you're comparing comparably equipped F-150s to comparably equipped Silverados and Ram 1500s, you will generally find higher towing capacities in the F-150. That aluminum construction also helps us out when it comes to cargo capacity in the bed, because we have a high payload ability in the F-150 when properly equipped, up to 3,270 pounds. Now again, the diesel does not give us max payload. The diesel tops out at 1,940. The high payload range that we see in the F-150 is enabled by the fact that Ford actually uses two different frames under the body of the F-150 depending on which option you get. And that top-end max payload frame is not available with the diesel engine at this time. That said, the average F-150 is going to offer you more payload ability than the average Silverado or Ram 1500. When you comparably equip them, this vehicle could be up to about 500 pounds higher in terms of overall payload ability than what we see in the Ram 1500 especially. Since the F-150 diesel is all about towing, I've connected my trailer so we can see how this does out on gravel roads, out on regular roads, etc. My trailer currently has about 7,000 pounds total trailer weight to it. Let's get our numbers out of the way up front. 0 to 60 in this model happened in 8.1 seconds. Keep in mind, of course, that there are a variety of different axles you can choose from. You can get the 4-wheel drive one or the rear-wheel drive one. There are different trim levels, etc. So the model that we're testing here, which is the 4-wheel drive Platinum trim, this one ran in 8.1 seconds. It's likely that there are Ford models that are going to be a little faster than this. There may even be models that will be a little bit slower than this. The last Ram 1500 EcoDiesel that we tested accomplished the same task a little bit shorter in 7.8 seconds, so they're right around the same neighborhood. One of the first things you'll notice about this engine and transmission combination out on the road is that the 10-speed automatic transmission does not necessarily have a broader ratio spread than the average 8-speed automatic transmission out there, and that was deliberate according to Ford and General Motors. This transmission was co-developed by those two companies specifically for performance vehicles and pickup trucks, because these two vehicle types oddly have some synergies when it comes to transmission design. When I'm towing a heavy trailer like the one that's right behind me up a hill, you want a lot of gear ratios that are close together, especially if you're driving a turbo diesel engine down the road. That's because diesels have a relatively narrow power band compared to a gasoline engine. So the more gear ratios you have in between high and low, the more variations you have available to you as you're going uphill. So it doesn't feel like you have to dive into the throttle harder and you don't have to wait for the engine to spool up, etc. It's a very pleasing combination as far as towing goes. Back when Ram launched their small turbo diesel engine, that was one of the big selling points for that vehicle, and that is just as true for this as it was for that Ram back then, only to the next level because now we get 2 additional gear ratios to choose from. Now, I don't think this transmission is quite as smooth as the ZF 8-speed automatic or the General Motors 8-speed automatic that we find in some of their pickup trucks, but it is smoother than the 6-speed automatic transmission we find in Toyota pickup trucks or the 7-speed automatic we find in some Nissan trucks. In our 60 to 0 braking test, this model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 130 feet, which is fairly average for a large pickup truck like this. While we're talking about braking, let's talk about engine braking. This is a 3-liter diesel engine, so it's not going to have the same kind of engine braking ability that you'll find in the larger PowerStroke engines in the F-250 and F-350. That's just to be expected. But we do get better engine braking out of this engine than the twin-turbo gasoline engines that we find in Ford's engine lineup. That's likely because the compression ratio is higher and just the overall design of diesel engines. They tend to give you better engine braking than a similar displacement gasoline engine. That means that if you're rolling down the road with a relatively heavy trailer, this engine versus the 2.7-liter twin-turbo, you're definitely going to get a better engine braking benefit out of this engine than that alternative. That'll help save some wear and tear on your brakes and some brake heating. In terms of overall handling, this handles pretty much like you'd expect out of a pickup truck. It handles like a truck. That is to say that it's very similar to the GMC Sierra and, of course, the Chevy Silverado. Comparable model to comparable model, the F-150 can be a little bit lighter than some of the competition, so obviously that will pay dividends when it comes to overall handling. Compared to the Ram 1500, I actually think the Ram is a little bit better handling, and that's due primarily to the rear suspension design that we find in the Ram 1500. The optional air suspension also has a slight benefit there as well. When we're out on rougher gravel roads like we're on right here, you'll immediately notice the difference in terms of the overall ride firmness between this and the Ram 1500 pickup truck. Ram uses a very different rear suspension in the 1500. They use coil springs rather than leaf springs, and they have an optional air suspension in that vehicle. Those two things make the Ram 1500 drive very differently out on the road, whether it's laden or unladen versus something like the F-150 or the Silverado or the Sierra. That suspension design tends to give the Ram 1500 a ride that is a little bit more similar to a full-size SUV or perhaps a very large crossover than a traditional pickup truck. So if you're looking for one of the best highway rides or one of the smoothest rides out on rougher roads, then the Ram 1500 pickup truck is going to be an excellent option, especially with that air suspension. In terms of cabin noise, this is very quiet, just as you'd expect from a top-end pickup truck. At 50 miles an hour on a level road surface, we scored 69 decibels, which makes this one of the quietest cabins that we've tested. Now, that really shouldn't surprise too many of you because this is a body-on-frame vehicle, and generally speaking, body-on-frame vehicles do very well when it comes to cabin noise, especially road noise. That's because there is some isolation between the body and the frame, so vibrations don't come through the road quite as much as you'd find in a unibody vehicle. The frame contains the engine, the transmission, the wheels, the suspension, etc., and of course that tow hitch back there. So one of the other things you'll notice in a body-on-frame vehicle like this pickup truck versus towing with something like a Dodge Durango is that the cabin is going to be much quieter when that trailer is connected to it. You really can't hear the tongue moving around there, the trailer hitch in the receiver moving around, the ball jostling around, etc. But if I were in my Dodge Durango, you would definitely be hearing all of that in the cabin when the trailer's connected, because the body and the frame are all one piece in a unibody vehicle. When it comes to overall fuel economy, I have to say that I am a little bit disappointed. Now, we have been getting just over the EPA score. We've been getting about 23 miles per gallon in this four-wheel drive model, even though it has been in two-wheel drive most of the time. Overall, this diesel engine is a very competent package out on the road, but it's up against some pretty stiff competition because the Ram 1500 pickup truck is all new. It has slightly better on-road manners. It also has that available air suspension, which actually helps out when it comes to towing as well. We don't have a diesel engine yet, but we are expecting one perhaps next year. That's also when we'll be seeing the new diesel engine in the Sierra and the Silverado, so be sure and stay tuned for those reviews coming up as soon as we can get our hands on them. I skipped over fuel economy a little briefly in the drive section because we need to talk about it in a little bit more detail with actual dollars behind the fuel economy numbers. Because the F-150 is the most fuel efficient vehicle in the F-150 lineup. However, it's not necessarily going to be the least expensive to own and operate, because we really have to take a look at the bigger picture here. The 22 mile per gallon EPA average in the 4x4 model is about the same as the 2018 Ram EcoDiesel's 22 miles per gallon. Now, we do expect to see a slightly higher MPG number in the new 2019 EcoDiesel or 2020 EcoDiesel when it finally happens, but the important thing to know here is there is only one diesel at the moment in this segment, and that is the Ford diesel, because the Chevy diesel doesn't exist yet and the Ram diesel doesn't exist yet. But based on the previous generation Ram estimates and the fact that the new model is going to be just a slight improvement on the older model, I expect that it's probably still going to beat the Ford when it comes to overall highway fuel economy, and the Ford is likely to beat the Ram when it comes to overall city fuel economy. But the elephant in this room really is Ford's own 2.7 liter twin-turbo 6-cylinder engine. So instead of talking about direct comparisons, because we can't at the moment, we're instead going to talk about the diesel versus Ford's own 2.7. The Ford twin-turbo V6 is a very different animal than the new 4-cylinder turbo engine that we see in the General Motors pickup truck lineup, because that engine was really designed more as a V6 replacement, whereas Ford actually designed the 2.7 liter twin-turbo 6 to be a V8 replacement, and that's really obvious when you look at the overall design. And the 2.7 liter twin-turbo 6 is currently the most popular engine in the Ford F-150. When designing the 2.7 liter twin-turbo engine, Ford really did design it quite like a diesel turbocharged engine. We have a compacted graphite block, which is something that you generally only see in diesel engines out there. It's actually the same type of material that we see in the 3-liter turbo diesel, and that is a little bit different than some of Ford's other EcoBoost engines, including the more powerful 3.5 liter engine. Ford mates both engines to exactly the same 10-speed automatic transmission. This is another interesting twist because the gasoline engine benefits from the same ratio spread and same number of gears that we get in the diesel engine. So one of the things I really loved about this small diesel was the fact that it was paired to an excellent transmission that had a lot of gears for you to choose from. That same advantage goes right into the 2.7 liter turbo as well. Now let's talk about the power figures, because this is another interesting comparison. The gasoline 2.7 produces 75 more horsepower than the diesel engine, so that is going to get you off the line a little bit quicker. But when it comes to towing and hauling, the two are actually quite close, because the diesel ends up producing only 40 pound-feet of torque more than the 2.7. The 2.7 produces 400 pound-feet for the 2018 model year. And again, both are mated to that newer 10-speed automatic. With the engines being so close in terms of overall on-paper comparisons, let's talk about how much they're going to cost you. The diesel is a $4,000 upcharge over the 2.7 liter twin-turbo, and actually still $2,400 more than the optional 3.5 liter twin-turbo on the Lariat. And that is important because the Lariat is the least expensive trim for the diesel at the moment. And that puts you at $46,410 for the least expensive two-wheel drive diesel. If you want the four-wheel drive diesel, which is again what we were driving, then you're going to pay even more for that. Because of the way that Ford has decided to price the diesel and where they've decided to insert it in the F-150 lineup, oddly enough, a F-250 diesel is not going to cost you much different than a base F-150 diesel. Now, you will be getting more feature content, more gadgets and goodies inside the cabin of the F-150 diesel, but if you're simply looking for a Ford diesel pickup truck, you may actually find the F-250 to be a better deal, especially if you're using that diesel really as a towing and hauling vehicle. Now we must move on to the tricky topic of operational costs, because logically operational costs are one of the big reasons that people buy diesel pickup trucks. Now, despite getting 1 mile per gallon better than the 2.7 liter twin turbo, it's actually likely going to be slightly more expensive to operate the diesel engine in the F-150. The big reason for that is the cost of diesel in America. Here in California and in most states, diesel is more expensive than gasoline. So you have to get a great deal better fuel economy in order to actually start saving money, because if you're getting just slightly better fuel economy, then the extra cost of diesel is going to kind of cancel that out. We also have the added expense of the diesel exhaust fluid in the F-150 diesel that you don't in the regular EcoBoost 2.7. That particular cost will help offset the likely increased maintenance costs on the gasoline engine. We don't have any spark plugs to replace on the diesel, but we do have some other longer-term operational costs on that model, like the timing belt that will have to get changed. Those are pretty much equal from gasoline to diesel. The result of this is that the F-150 diesel is not quite the game changer that some people hope for. Part of that is because of the overall expense of the engine, part of that is due to the fuel economy of the engine, and the last component of this is where Ford has chosen to put the diesel into the lineup, because you can't get an absolute base model of the F-150 with the diesel. Now personally, I think that's a little bit of a pity, because Ram was pretty aggressive with their diesel, putting it into lower end trim levels, so you could get a nearly base pickup truck with the diesel if you wanted to, but we don't see that in the Ford lineup. At this moment, we don't know exactly where General Motors is going to insert the 3-liter turbo diesel in the Silverado or Sierra when it comes around the early part of 2019. But I suspect it is likely going to be held in the upper or mid-level trims of those trucks, just like we see in the F-150 lineup. So what on earth did I mean about the chainsaw at the beginning of this video? Well, the two reminded me a lot of one another because they're both good for very specific tasks. But if I had to choose just one pickup truck or just one saw, I'm not sure that these would be the ones that I would pick. The fuel economy improvement for the diesel over the twin-turbo 2.7-liter 6 is relatively minor. And even though in the real world it may be a little bit larger than it is on paper, you're still not really going to save anything by getting the diesel. So for the average person that is towing perhaps once a month or twice a month, or even I would say weekly, the 2.7-liter V6 just makes more sense. But if you're the kind of person that has a trailer attached to their half-ton pickup truck every single day, then actually I would say the diesel makes a little bit more sense. I really like the way that it drives, and you may actually get better fuel economy and enough better fuel economy in that diesel to actually pay for the engine option over time. But really only if you're in that specific use case of having a trailer attached to your truck every single day and you're driving a great deal. Likewise, my small electric chainsaw is good for a very specific task. When I'm getting in and out of a vehicle very regularly and I need to cut wood that's in the road, like I had to do in order to film the F-150, because down that private road trees fall a great deal. Or if I'm going somewhere and I don't need the gasoline smells to be on me. If you need a chainsaw in an emergency situation, it's just really handy to have something that size. It also has an electric chain brake in case you're wondering. But if I were to pick a chainsaw that I had to work with and it was my only chainsaw that I had, that's just not the one that I would pick. Similarly, again, if I had to have just one engine, one pickup truck, then my choice would probably be the 2.7-liter twin-turbo 6, because that's just a better all-around engine and drivetrain in my opinion. The diesel makes really good sense in one specific use case, but I would say the average person would be better off with that other engine. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Be sure and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Check out those related videos, and of course, stay tuned for our full reviews on the upcoming Ram 1500 diesel for 2019 or perhaps 2020. We aren't sure when that will happen, but definitely the 2019 Silverado and GMC Sierra diesel, because that should be coming right around January of 2019. If you want to support this channel, and I hope you do, go ahead and click up there to the top of your screen. That'll take you over to patreon.com, where you can make a recurring monthly contribution. I'll see you later.